Let me tell you about a friend of mine. He's one of the most faithful disciples of Jesus I know. He has a powerful ministry. When he preaches, the lives of his listeners change. And yet for years now, he's suffered regular bouts of dreadful, soul-suffocating depression. The kind of depression that can destroy all hope and all life. I wish I could speak of some sudden, miraculous healing, but I cannot. Each time he must make a long, painful, slow journey out of the dark back toward the light. And while he's lost, he must somehow survive in that dark. How has he survived? By praying the Psalms, especially those we call Psalms of Lament. The cries that rise up from the souls of broken and hurting people in those pages become his. They articulate the agony that has silenced his soul. For him, they hold the fragile line against total desolation. They could be that for you too. Michael Jenkins, our presenter, will take us deep into the laments that meant so much to my friend. And Michael has his own story of how these psalms spoke to him in his time of need.
At the heart of the Old Testament is a resource of almost unimaginable power, the Psalms of Lament. We are familiar with their cries for God's assistance and their complaints. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? To you, O Lord, I call, my rock. Do not refuse to hear me. Behind the cry for God's help is an understanding of God's character and God's relationship to humanity that may threaten us. And yet, the power of these psalms lies precisely in the claim they make, demanding a fundamental reorientation of human life in relationship to God. Scholars observe that the world of the Psalms is grounded in a theological affirmation that can be summed up in a single sentence: the Lord reigns. Everything in the Psalms, from the fate of nations to the struggles of individuals, is connected to this simple affirmation. When we read or pray the Psalms, we are set in the midst of a world in which the reign of the Lord is absolute and comprehensive. The disjunction and tension between the world of the Psalms and our world is undeniable. In the world of the Psalms, God is at the center rather than the self. The sovereign God of the Psalms of Lament is holy creator of all that exists and ruler over all that has been created, a God ultimately accountable for the wonders and terrors of creation. The Lord is judge in absolute righteousness, not subject to flattery or bribe. The Lord is defender of the defenseless, guardian of the righteous. The Lord lays claim to all humanity and to all parts of human life. The Lord, portrayed in the Psalms, refuses to be limited to the sphere of religion, much less to a privatized, individualistic faith. The Lord rules in power, and because the Lord reigns, the psalmist can cry out to the Lord. But also, because the Lord reigns, the psalmist risks dislocation and transformation in crying out. The key to understanding the force, the beauty, and the faith of the Psalms of Lament, and the key to understanding their value for us today, lies in perhaps the oldest and most practical theological problem known to humanity. If the Lord reigns, why is life so difficult, so painful, even for those who live faithfully and trust in the Lord? This crisis of biblical faith runs straight through the Psalms of Lament, and the reign of the Lord grinds against the experience of the people. By their very form, the Psalms of Lament reflect this crisis. Even a quick reading of the Psalms makes clear that the Psalms of Lament stand in striking contrast to other kinds of psalms. Take, for example, Psalms 22 and 23. The familiar 23rd Psalm paints a pastoral scene. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Now, listen to the opening of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? Some Christians say they are not comfortable praying the Psalms of Lament, that Christians should be more upbeat, accentuate the positive. Maybe this is why we consistently choose Psalm 23 over Psalm 22 as our favorite. Yet, it is Psalm 22 that is on the lips of Jesus Christ on the cross, and the strains of lament run through the Gospels. Perhaps our resistance to the Psalms of Lament has less to do with our appreciation of the positive than with their unrelenting view that the Lord reigns over every aspect of our lives. The same Lord reigns in both Psalm 22 and Psalm 23, but in the Psalm of Lament, the character of the Lord who reigns is disclosed in a pattern that closely tracks the difficulties of faithful human existence, moving from a more or less settled life through painful experiences in which life is turned upside down to a new and deeper and radically transformed understanding of life and faith. Let's look more closely. The Psalms of Lament begin by calling upon God. This initial call is a cry from the depths of the human soul in the face of persecution, pain, loss, grief, sickness, sin, betrayal, or abandonment. The psalmist wants to understand how it is possible for the Lord who reigns to allow the faithful to suffer and the Lord's own law to be scorned. Along with the cry of invocation, O Lord, is often a cry of complaint, such as, I cry by day, but you do not answer. And this complaint the psalmist connects to a remembrance of God's past faithfulness. In you, our ancestors trusted, they trusted, and you delivered them. The psalmist wants an answer to this question. If indeed you do reign, Lord, and if you have helped your people in the past, where are you now when I need you?
Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ear be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you, that you may be worshipped. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in the Lord's word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than the watchman for the morning. More than the watchman for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord is steadfast love. And with the Lord is plenteous redemption. And the Lord will redeem Israel from all its iniquities.
The Psalms of Lament pull no punches. The psalmist pleads, begs, and bargains with God, reminding God of promises yet unkept, asking God to judge between his cause and others. And the psalmist prays thus because he believes God reigns in justice, absolutely and universally. But praying the Psalms of Lament is a pilgrimage into the unknown, in which one's understanding of God and relationship with God will be challenged. In the unfolding experience of lamentation, the psalmist understands that God does not immunize the faithful against suffering and difficulties, but neither does God abandon the faithful, even when they feel God forsaken. The Lord delivers us, according to the psalmist, but we are delivered through the valley of the shadow of death, not merely from it. To learn to pray these psalms as a community of faith or as individuals requires us to decenter our lives according to the reign of a Lord whose ways are not our ways, and whose healing of us may lead us far from rest and comfort. The Psalms of Lament will not allow us to retreat to a devotional cocoon of self-delusion and denial about just how difficult it is to live faithfully in this world. Perhaps the reason so many churches simply avoid using the Psalms of Lament is because they can so unsettle our settled lives. Not long ago, I was attending a preaching conference. As I sat in the pew, I thumbed through the back of the hymn book. I often look through hymnals to see what selections of Scripture they provide for corporate response and worship. What I found in this one surprised and disturbed me. Only psalms of thanksgiving and praise were included. Psalms of status quo, we might call them. Even Psalm 22 was absent. Reading the selections and noting the omissions made me think about what it means when our churches regularly avoid the more difficult, the problematic, and painful aspects of life and faith in our headlong pursuit of the pleasant and the positive. The Psalms of thanksgiving and praise make sense only against the backdrop of the Psalms of lament. Those who thank and praise God do so because God has delivered them from the depths, from the grip of injustice, from plague, or from enemies, and sometimes through the judgment of the God whose righteousness seeks to make us obedient and whose grace yearns to make us merciful. The Psalms of Lament remind us there is no healing without sickness, no resurrection without death. Even more, they remind us that the way we live through sickness is as important as being made well, and the way and the purpose for which we die is no less crucial than the resurrection God promises. A people who avoid acknowledging the painful realities of life, including anger, bitterness, self-righteousness, and desire for revenge, and who refuse to submit these unpleasant aspects of their lives to God, may miss God's greatest gift, the opportunity to be judged and transformed by the Lord, whose reign extends over all parts of our lives, even those parts we would like to reserve for ourselves alone. Just how personal the reign of the Lord can become came home to me a few years ago when my wife, Deborah, was diagnosed with cancer. We were living in Scotland then, and were in the States for a few weeks visiting family. While here, Debbie saw her doctor for a routine checkup. In the course of the examination, the doctor found a lump in her neck. Probably nothing serious, just a benign tumor, the doctor assured us. We'll do surgery, and you'll be on your way back home to Aberdeen in no time. But the tumor was not benign. It was cancer. It had done a lot of damage already. I shall never forget the night following surgery, as I sat in a chair beside her bed. Everything had seemed so perfect up to then. We loved the life we lived together. We loved our children, our church, our vocations. Within days, we had gone from what seemed perfect normality and stability to a threat of loss so terrible I could hardly contemplate it. I remained awake through the night praying the Psalms and the prayers in my Book of Common Prayer. I could not bring myself to pray some of the Psalms that night. My heart resisted rejoicing, praising, singing joyfully to the Lord. The songs of thanksgiving and praise, so much a part of our life, had become overnight strangers to my faith. But that night, I discovered the wisdom and the power of the Psalms of Lament. There in those Psalms was a person of faith who had walked the path I was now walking. His questions, his feelings were not foreign to my faith at that moment. No matter how he wept and railed against God, his faith had found a home in the Lord who reigns. In time, Debbie recovered, but I will never forget what we learned. To believe, as the psalmist does, that the Lord reigns is to embrace a faithfulness that may be hard to bear. But it is a faithfulness that will sustain us and can transform us when life comes crashing in. Certainly, there are easier faiths to hold, but nothing less will hold us when lamenting is the only act of faith that makes sense of life.